Well, good evening, everybody. So, I haven't gone on here to talk with you in a while, and I made a post today. Excuse me, and it was about what the courts are telling you when you try to use your rights. I was actually really excited to see the responses that we're getting, and let me tell you why. Okay, one, because y'all are knocking it out of the park. You're standing up for yourself. You're figuring this out. And that's huge. When Ron and I first published, we hardly knew anybody that knew any of these arguments, that understood that there was a big, huge void in these courts and that their rights were completely being ignored. So today showed me that you guys are understanding this, you are standing up for yourself, but let's get into this a little more, okay? Most of you that are on this page, you're on this page because you are looking for intellectual solutions, all right? So let's just get that settled right now. If you can hear me, by the way, click yes, comment yes on there. I get all confused. Click yes, no, whatever. Let me know so that I know if I need to adjust anything, because I don't want you to miss a minute of this. It's really important information that I think is going to help you continue, because there's a lot that goes on and a lot of stress, and sometimes you might get a little confused with, like, what are you fighting, why are you fighting, and things like that. And they use a lot of things like harassment, intimidation, bullying, and they'll accuse you of those things, won't they? They'll say you're overbearing, you're gaming the system. So when you're making these arguments that there are rights that they're ignoring, you need some support too. And that's why I'm here tonight, because I'm just on here for a very short time, because I am going to jump off soon. But what we're going to talk about tonight is something that I haven't addressed with all of you in a very long time. I used to get into things about how movements are formed and what creates the momentum, how you know when you're actually achieving success. Those are in videos a long time ago that I made, and I'm going to bring those back and put them up so that you guys can watch those again. They were really good, and they helped a lot of people during a time that they thought the movement had lost momentum or wasn't making progress. Okay, so we are making progress, and it's good to remind ourselves about that. And first, I want to go over some critical understandings about movements, okay? And I want to use some words of a woman who was very critical to some of the past movements. She helped create one or participated in some of the chapters that were formed. Like at she was at Shaw College in Raleigh, North Carolina, and her name was Ella Josephine Baker, and they called her Miss Baker. And she also helped form some NAACP chapters. So they call her Miss Baker. And one of the quotes that she stated, and the reason she made this quote, is because there was a crucial need to understand movements, right? So I'm going to read a quote that she stated, and then we're going to go into why I'm talking about this. So, and this video tonight is about how are they keeping you down? And we'll get into that. So her quote is, "In order for us as poor and oppressed people to become a part of a society that is meaningful, the system under which we now exist has to be radically changed. That means we are going to have to learn to think in radical terms." I use the term radical in its original meaning, getting down to and understanding the root cause. It means facing a system that does not lend itself to your needs and devising the means by which you change the system or that system. That is easier said than done, but one of the things that has to be faced is that in the process of wanting to change the system, how much do we have to do to find out who we are, where we've come from, and where we are going? But in order to see where we're going, we not only must remember where we've been, but we must understand where we have been. So what do you all do when you're told your rights don't matter? If you just say okay, click yes in the comment. If you tell them they do matter and here's why, then tell me that you do understand. Okay, so click it instead of clicking yes or commenting yes, you waive them. Comment no, you don't waive them, if you understand. Okay, if that makes sense, so that I can see where you're all at. So in order to figure out what to do when you're told that rights don't matter, you've got to understand where your thinking is right now, don't you? You have to change your perspective. I was talking to a parent tonight, and their perspective was, my life is over if I end up having to go to jail because it'll ruin everything. And what do you think their ultimate threat is to all of you? Throwing you in jail. Okay, so they know if they make that ultimate threat, you will most likely back down, give in, and not force them to actually do their job, which is follow their Article 6 oath, right? To defend and protect the Constitution, which means to apply it to you, to protect you with it. So what do you do when you're told your rights don't matter? Do you give in? Yes. Or do you push ahead? So your answer would be no, you don't give in. So one of the things that I've heard people tell me as the reason why they don't pursue it anymore, or they stop pursuing any arguments that would have anything to do with Supreme Court of the United States cases, or the Constitution, or parental rights, is because it didn't matter anymore, right? It just didn't matter to anybody. Let me tell you a quote from another student. Her name's Cortland Cox. And she was part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is the SNCC that I mentioned earlier, or what they call SNCC. There was not a sense that the other side would do the right thing if you told them. Because at the end of the day, the other side knew what it was doing to you better than you did. Does that apply here? Yes or no? Just comment down below if you think that applies. So how committed are each of you to all of this? What is this to you? As I was talking to another parent last night, and I asked them those very questions, and they were all over the board. They didn't know how to tell me what it was, the reason why they finally found us and put their rights arguments in front, other than, yes, they have a sense of pride with the country, and they understood that, and they were disappointed that these rights were being ignored. But what is that core, simple reason? Okay, and what I mean by that is there was something when this first started that was really important to you. Maybe it was that you got to continue to read to your children at night. Or maybe you didn't get to do that when you were married and you wanted to change your life now, right? So maybe it was super important that you got to make different choices about your career, and you weren't able to do that while you were married. So you thought when you got divorced, you would now have those freedoms. Okay, so simplify it. Don't give me the answers you think I want to hear. Okay, and I think that's why they were all over the board, and that's understandable. I think they were trying to give me something that would satisfy things that they think I'm looking for. But that's not our purpose here, is it? This is all has to come from you and your soul and your being, and the core reason why you're so passionate about certain things in your life. Of course, your rights are what protect you to be able to do this. But if you don't understand why it is you're even involved in this, you're going to easily be defeated, right? Because you won't have that motivation. It comes from the internal soul to keep going. So really dig deep and ask how committed you are to this. What is this to you? What does it mean to you? What are you thinking? What are you fighting for? Okay, we all know we're fighting government supremacy. We're fighting oppression of the government, okay? We all know this. And I'm not trying to make this fight about you against the other parent. God, no. We know we fought many years to change all of your perspective from that. Because, by the way, tell me one movement that was about one individual fighting another individual, and that was the whole movement. Because that's really what happens and how they're getting you distracted. They're like, oh, this is you and the other parent fighting. No, it's not. You're fighting government oppression, government abuse. Okay, so let me remind you guys, if you're on this page, it's because you're looking for the intellectual perspectives of this movement. So sometimes some of these videos will get pretty heavy into that. So if that's what your interests are, you're in the right place. So what is your commitment to? How many movements have you ever seen that, like I said, that complained about, let's say it's just, a specific company. That's not it either. It might be that the corporation is oppressing a certain class of people, right? But in general, what it is that you're fighting is, that you see in movements, is government policies, systems, set of rules that are adopted and enforced by government state actors, etc. Like Jim Crow laws, for instance, prohibition of same-sex marriage. And right now, what you're fighting against is the denial that your rights apply when two parents are in disagreement in the court. And you're fighting the government applying their full force and authority, right? Because they're applying their authority to enforce whatever extra rights they give the other parent, and keeping you oppressed by limiting you more than the other one without proper justification or causes of action. So you're fighting government action, state actor, government abuses. They are not following their Article 6 oath, especially if you ask them to apply certain due process, or ask them what due process you'll get applied, which, by the way, I've seen many parents ask that now, and the courts ignore it, right? So that's your movement. But again, go back to your core. What got you involved in this? So what are the courts saying? How are the courts attacking your fight to protect your family's civil rights today? They're saying things like constitutional rights don't apply. Federal Constitution doesn't apply. You have no rights in court. These are some of the comments you guys made on that post, that meme post today. You have only the rights the judge decides you have. How are you addressing it? Are you saying that are they saying that your arguments are meritless, and that's not the way they do things? Do you know any responses from, let's say, Supreme Court of the United States cases? And don't keep telling me they don't care about it, because you've got to block that noise out. That's noise that they create to distract you. All right? So if your attorney says all they're going to care about is what you can dig up on the other parent, that's noise. You have to keep reminding yourself. Okay? So you've got to be focused on, what do you say when they tell you these things? This isn't all the pieces of what you're doing when you go to trial and things like that. I'm not a lawyer. I don't practice law. I'm not a substitute for a lawyer. We are actually an additional resource. We help you layer in these arguments into the process. And that can be pretty scary when attorneys are fighting against you because it's uncomfortable. I'm going to tell you a quote in a little bit about what one of the Supreme Court cases says when government's uncomfortable. Okay? So what are you saying when they say your arguments are meritless? That's not the way you do things. I don't see any of you posting any Supreme Court cases, but if you can think of one, post it there for me, so I can see what you are studying, and we can address some of those things. I don't see any comments right now, but that happens sometimes when I'm doing the lives. I don't always see your comments for some reason. Okay, so if you are addressing the court and you're asking them what processes do, and you're asking them questions of law, you need to know certain responses back so you can keep that narrative going. And I'm not talking specific to any specific question out of those questions. We're talking in general here today. So let me give you an example from a SCOTUS case. It's actually called Williams versus Illinois. And we're not going to worry about what the case is actually about, whether the holdings in the case that they put in the head notes, like if you're using Westlaw, we're not worrying about any of that. We are talking about general constitutional principles that apply everywhere. It's kind of like the theory of gravity, okay? The law of gravity, excuse me. So we're not worrying about all the details of the case. We're just worrying about one principle out of it, okay? So here's the quote that I wanted to give you. Perhaps a fairer and more accurate statement would be that new cases expose old infirmities, which apathy or absence of challenge has permitted to stand. So I'm going to repeat that again. And this response is to them saying your argument is meritless. That's not the way we do things. You can respond back with perhaps a fairer and more accurate statement would be that new cases expose old infirmities which apathy or absence of challenge has permitted to stand. So what are you saying there? You're telling them that the reason you're bringing this challenge is because of the way they're doing things, is because they aren't doing this. Okay? So that helps you say that, and that is a direct quote from Williams versus Illinois, which is Supreme Court of the United States, so it is controlling in all states. They might then say something like, sorry, our practices have already been challenged. We've been told it's perfectly fine what we're doing. And the statutes all been told they're constitutional. We're good. Okay? So we don't need to hear it from you anymore. Well, what's another quote you can use? And I'm just using this one case tonight to show you how easy it is to simplify this down and respond back to them. Okay? So the next quote would be, while neither the antiquity of a practice nor the fact of steadfast legislative and judicial adherence to it through the centuries insulates it from constitutional attack, these factors should be weighed in the balance. So I'll repeat it again. While neither the antiquity of a practice nor the fact of steadfast legislative and judicial adherence to it through the centuries insulates it from constitutional attack, these factors should be weighed in the balance. So that response goes directly to, you're asking them what process is due. You're asking them to respond to your questions of law. Okay? So for instance, if you're going into a child custody hearing and they're telling you that none of your 14th Amendment due process rights are going to apply, then you're asking them to answer certain questions so that you can address them during your or prior to your litigation in order to resolve those decisions before you actually go to court and litigate things that are going to affect those rights, right? You have a right to do that. And so many people don't. And what is another thing that they might say? Oh, that's going to cost way more money, right? That's going to take a lot more of our judicial time to do that. We don't have time for that. We have a system down. We know what we're doing, and we're just going to keep doing that. And I know there's another quote that I wrote here. Let me find it for you. Okay. When they say that, third quote from the case, this last quote I'm going to give you from the case. You could explain to them, but the constitutional imperatives must have priority over the comfortable convenience of the status quo. And by the way, it's way less expensive to address these from the beginning than to have to clean up the rest of the mess that they created later. So how many times have all of you had to go back into court and back into court because it wasn't fair? You didn't get justice. Think about it. how many times did Cash say he was dragged back into court over child support? I think it was 14 or 17 times. How many times have you had to modify? Some of you have modified 3, 4 times. Okay, some of you are going to have to do that over and over again. How much judicial time, how much court time is that taking? I'm not just talking about this money you're spending, because the courts are complaining that you're taking up their docket, you're taking up their time, and you know, because actually once you go pro se and you learn how to knock out all of these, and I'm not saying this violently, peacefully, with protective orders and quash orders, knock out the gown, the psych evals, and all these things, what money are they really making on you anymore? Right? So they start complaining. They start trying to sanction. So your response to them when they say, oh, no, we can't do that because it's just going to take up too much time and it costs too much. Your response, but the constitutional imperatives must have priority over the comfortable convenience of the status quo. Those are all from Williams versus Illinois. Okay? They're going to punish you. They're going to threaten you. They're going to make you suffer, stop, and give in, just like every other movement. But think about these things and make sure that you work on changing your perspective about each one. So if they threaten to throw you in jail, they might actually make your voice bigger and louder. Yes, it sucks, but a lot of people that's happened to. And guess what? How many parents have been thrown in jail and you didn't know of them or know their name prior to that happening? Did it make their voice louder and bigger? Did it make you more aware of them? So now they have a larger platform for their voice and to get this information out there. So they're actually making your voice louder and bigger. So if you change your perspective about these things, I think it'll help you stay motivated, less depressed. Yes, it could affect what kind of careers you're going to go into because they mark you with felonies, misdemeanors, and things like that. It's another mechanism they use to try to discourage you. Do you think these others in the past who were thrown in jail didn't have negative effects from it? Yes, they did. That's why all of us have connections and you have support system to help you stay in the right frame of mind. We all know that you're paying a price, and we're very appreciative of that, because while I bring you this information, you guys are the warriors right now, right? Our kids are aged out. Mine and Ron's are aged out. And I'm Sherry Palmer, by the way, if some of you are watching and you don't know, with fixedfamilycourts.com. But oh, hey, you're on this page, so hopefully you know what page you're on. But if you're like me, you may not. Okay, so have you not done something because you were afraid of the retaliation? So that's my next question. So did you not file that motion where you wanted to ask them to honor the Article 6 duty because you got threatened before that? Did you not push for what you really wanted because you were told it was pointless and you would never get it? How many of you did that? So how many of you have already been shaken off of your path? And it's okay to say, I want to be able to make my own choices. I don't believe I have to get along with the other parent, but doesn't mean I'm going to go around, you know, trying to constantly annoy and harass the parent. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to be free from their control over me, and they can be free from my control. So some of you may have to adjust your thinking, because I have talked to a lot of parents who have said things like, well, but I don't like the way they're doing it, or they're not exactly healthy. Well, learn this stuff and figure out whether your requests are actually conflicting with what you're asking the court to do, because there are going to be things that even you're going to have to address internally. There are going to be things you can't protect your children from. So this is extra hard because of that. Okay? There's some harms you cannot protect them from. And we won't go into all those tonight. We can do a different video on that. That's a touchy topic, and I want to stay focused. So if you gave something up and you gave into something that you really, really thought you should keep pursuing, but you didn't because you were told it was pointless, you would never get it, put in the comment that yes, you gave something up. Okay, it's important for us to see these things. As you know, Ron and I, we work on writing SCOTUS arguments, and we want to make sure that we're giving SCOTUS the information that is the most up to date, and telling them that, hey, there's chilling effect out there. We have proof of it. So while we're not putting your names in there or anything, which is why I say put the state you're in. So some of you have put like Georgia, Connecticut, California. Some of you put the counties of the states you were in. Like some of you said Shasta and other counties. And then some of you have said Illinois. That's great, because then I know how to tell them, look, it is happening in all these states. Now, you and I, we all know it's happening, but they need those details in front of them constantly in order to encourage them to accept cases. Right? We want them to take one of these parent versus parent cases so we can get this issue resolved about constitutional rights not applying to parents versus parents. Okay? What else do we want to go over? Okay. Also tell me if they made you feel guilty for pushing the court to follow Article 6 duty. Okay? And make sure you include for me what exactly you asked them to do. If you want to private message me, that would be great. So, they don't generally threaten you. Some have with jail for trying to make these arguments. Usually the threat is like after an order is violated. So the biggest threat here is that they might try to punish you by saying, you're going to lose time with your child. But how many of you are already going to lose that or have already lost that? So how much of a threat is that really? And, you know, honestly, when I went through it, no jail cell could stop me from wanting to protect my relationship with me and my children. And if I didn't pursue this is my personal reason why I did this, is I was alienated severely. There was parental alienation, and it affected all 4 of my children, which shocked me at one point because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all 4 were effectively alienated eventually. And yes, I have relationships with them now. But it was just one of those things where I knew in my soul and in my heart that if I didn't fight back, that I would have no children in my life. So no jail cell no threat of a jail cell could stop me, because I understood that. I understood who I was, where I was going, where I would be if I didn't put this fight up, right? So if you're going to be insulted by them and waver because they threaten you, because you say you have rights, then think about this. Would we have any of these rights that we have today, the right to vote, interstate travel, the right to speak our mind, which I know is being challenged right now, not going into that today, all these things, if people didn't rise up, no matter the threat, and fight for it? So that's how you have to look at it, right? Let's see what's... Okay, so you're going to have to keep fighting until this government oppression is tamped down enough to where there's a better balance, and these violations, these separations of you and your children and your time, your right to raise your child directly, to have time with your child count as child support, as opposed to having massive amounts of money imposed on you, debts, obligations, whatever they want to call them, and have the true right to pursue happiness. That means how you choose to have relationships, how you choose, what you choose to have as a career. Until that has happened, until you reach that tipping point, we need to keep standing up for these things. That might mean one of the rights, I'm going to go into some of your core issues. One of the rights that you are fighting for is you don't want to work anymore and you want to barter throughout life. That's supposed to be okay. You're fighting to have the same right as anyone else would have. Think about if you had never gotten married. Where would you be now? You could make any of the decisions that were within the law and not be facing this terror, this tyranny, these fears, right? So why is it that just because you got with someone, I bet none of you ever thought that you would be in a court like you are now, like especially the ones sitting there facing jail time because of inability to pay child support, yet the bar is so high to prove that you can't pay child support. Now you're facing jail threats, real jail threats, and they can do up to 6 months at a time, 180 days. I bet you never thought you'd be there, did you? So I want to remind you, think about what it is you're fighting for. The deep core reason. Perhaps you were told, like I said before, you had to continue a job you no longer felt suited you. And you're fighting for the belief that you have the right to change this decision. That doesn't mean that you now take your fight and just narrow it to that issue. No, what we're saying is the fight to apply these rights, the fight for these protections of these rights is what protects all of those decisions. So you don't go and just say, oh, I just want to fight for this one thing. I want to make the choice of what kind of career I want to have. The way you get there is by learning what rights protect that decision and how you apply those. Okay? So think about it. Let's simplify this before we get done, because I do have to go tonight. I can't stay on here forever. I have some fun things I want to do, actually. So let's simplify this. How complicated was the lunch sit-ins? They simply wanted to be able to sit at the lunch counters and have lunch just like every other human being was allowed to have, and the only reason they weren't able to do it was the color of their skin, right? How simple was that? Your fight's that simple. How complicated was the fight to have the right to vote? This is why I'm saying, think about the core reason you're fighting here. Your core reason is that you just want to be able to remain in control over your own decisions and finances and choices with your child in your own life. It's as simple as that. So I have to go early tonight. I don't see a lot of questions on here. I'll look later. Thanks for joining me. And thank you so much for being members here. Visit me over at fixedfamilycourts.com. Send me a note. Let me know what you like, what you don't, what's working, what's not, so we can keep making progress, hit that tipping point, and finally resolve this. Thanks so much for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye.